This presentation will cover the current controversy over the Navy's use of active sonar and explosives during training missions in the Pacific Ocean. Before we start, I want to give you a little background on the issue and define some terms. First, the area being discussed is referred to as a range complex. A range complex is defined as a set of adjacent areas of sea space, undersea space, land ranges, and overlying airspace delineated for military training and testing activities. The Hawaii-Southern California Range Complex, which covers approximately 1,700 by 1,600 square miles, is the testing area being discussed in this presentation. The range complexes in the Hawaii-California area have existed since the 1930s. The Navy has recently applied and been accepted for a 5-year permit from the National Marine Fisheries Service to test military equipment, most notably sonar explosives, in this range complex. Controversy over harm to marine life has been present at every step. This is a map from the Navy's website of the range complex area. Since the Navy is a federal agency and its training would have a significant effect on the environment, the training missions proposed by the Navy required the creation of an environmental impact statement. This is a requirement of the National Environmental Protection Act of 1970. The following timeline shows the process of approval. On July 15, 2010, the Navy issued a notice of intent to draft an environmental impact statement in the Federal Register. A 60-day scoping period, or discussion period, followed publication in the Register. Comments were received from 228 individuals, agencies, and organizations. On May 11, 2012, a 60-day public comment period began. Open house meetings were held in Hawaii and California, and Navy representatives were in attendance to answer questions. On August 30, 2013, minor changes were made to the draft EIS based on the comment period and the scoping period, and an NOA for the final draft was published in the Federal Register. On December 13, 2013, the final EIS was accepted and authorized by the National Marine Fisheries Service. After many public meetings and redrafts, both individuals and organizations were allowed to give their input. So why the controversy? Well, many felt that the Navy failed to explore and consider all possible alternatives and weren't doing enough to mitigate the harm to marine life. Sonar use is an intrinsic part of the Navy's training activities. Sonar stands for Sound Navigation and Ranging. It's used to detect objects such as underwater mines and other submarines. It's also used to estimate range, velocity, direction, and water depth. About 58% of the U.S. Navy ships are equipped with active sonar. There are 3 different types of active sonar: high, mid, and low, but for this presentation we'll be focusing on mid-range sonar, as it's the primary tool for identifying submarines, and it's the type of sonar used most by the Navy. As useful as sonar is for humans, it can be very harmful to marine life, in particular whales and dolphins, which use echolocation to communicate and find food. Whales will swim hundreds of miles, rapidly change their depth, and even beach themselves to get away from the sounds of sonar. Mid-range sonar, the most widely used frequency, is emitted to the water column at a pressure of 235 or more decibels for about half a second to 2 seconds at a time, at 28-second intervals. This decibel level is similar to a rocket taking off. Mid-range sonar can retain an intensity of 140 decibels for as far as 300 miles from its source. Animals that use echolocation, whales and dolphins, are the most heavily affected by sonar. Sonar can be 4 times as loud as a whale call, and certain species, such as beaked whales, are more sensitive to sonar than others. Sonar's effects range from minor behavioral changes to death. Whales and dolphins have the most highly developed inner ear of any mammal and are highly sensitive to sonar sounds. The acoustic trauma of sonar waves can cause temporary hearing loss, or may cause the animal to panic and surface too quickly in an attempt to flee the loud noise. When this occurs, the whale or dolphin's tissues can hemorrhage and form nitrogen air bubbles, much like a human being getting the bends. This formation of air bubbles is called embolism. The noise from sonar and other loud underwater activities can stress these creatures and lead to a compromised immune system or decreased reproductive rates. Sonar can also cause behavioral effects such as beaching or stranding. It can interrupt the feeding, nursing, and breeding. It can cause displacement from preferred areas. It can cause desensitization to noise. And it may hinder interspecies communication. The following occurrences are a select few strandings that have happened to coincide with nearby sonar and explosive testing events. In May of 1996, 12 Cuvier's beaked whales beached themselves along the coast of Greece. NATO was testing active sonar nearby. In March of 2000, mass stranding of multiple species of whales occurred in the Bahamas. This incident coincided with Navy mid-frequency sonar testing. In May of 2000, 3 Cuvier's beaked whales stranded themselves at Madeira Island, Portugal. The pattern of injury was consistent with the Bahamas stranding. In September of 2002, 14 beaked whales of 3 different species beached themselves on the Canary Islands. They showed severe hemorrhage, gas bubble lesions, and embolism, and this incident also coincided with a NATO naval exercise. In June of 2003, 14 harbor porpoises beached themselves in the Harrow Strait, Washington. Killer whales were also videotaped showing a behavioral reaction. The USS Shrew was using sonar in the area. And in July of 2004, 150 to 200 melon-headed whales milled in a shallow bay in Kauai, Hawaii. These are normally deep ocean creatures. They needed help getting back to the deep ocean, and the incident coincided with a joint U.S.-Japan exercise. These photos were taken at some of the incidents I just described. The melon-headed whales in Hawaii are the first picture. The bottom left picture shows an autopsy being conducted on a beached beaked whale in the Canary Islands. And the third picture of a harbor porpoise shows bleeding from the ears, which is an indicator of acoustic trauma. This was after the Harrow Strait incident. As I briefly discussed earlier, NEPA plays a role in any federal activity that significantly impacts the human environment. It was NEPA that required the Navy to draft an environmental impact statement for its proposed training activities. Significant impact on the human environment is a notoriously ambiguous statement, which has created substantial litigation over the years. Lawsuits over the Navy's activity in the Hawaii-California range tend to use NEPA as a springboard. Objections often contend that the Navy has not properly taken the environmental impacts of its sonar activities into account when planning training exercises. To discuss the Navy's EIS a bit further, and give you a better idea of what it entails, it should be known that the EIS is not just a few pages of information. It's a 3-volume, comprehensive report that is hundreds of pages in length. It lists all activities that will take place and all species that could potentially be impacted by these activities. Each species in the area is discussed separately. Information covers a description of the species, its status and management, its range and distribution, its population and abundance, and any known predator-prey interactions, and any known species-specific threats. It thoroughly covers every environmental consequence, and not just sonar-related danger, to each potentially affected species, and not just marine mammals. Other than sonar stressors, it covers energy stressors, physical disturbance and strike stressors, entanglement stressors, ingestion stressors, and secondary stressors. The National Marine Fisheries Service authorized the naval testing from December 26, 2013 until December 25, 2018. The letter of authorization lists each species of potentially affected mammals separately and sets allowable limits on takes and mortalities for each year. Injury authorizations are categorized into A or B depending on the level of injury, and these will be discussed further in the following slides. Just keep in mind that a take can be a misleading term. It does not mean that the animal is killed. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service defines take as followed: to harass, hunt, capture, kill, or attempt to harass, hunt, capture, or kill any marine mammal. Level A harassment is any exposure to sound that causes physical injury. Death and serious injury, such as tissue hemorrhage, is obviously included, but so is permanent hearing loss. These are some of the numbers that I pulled from the letter of authorization to give you an idea of expected injuries. This is not a complete list, but a link to the letter of authorization's complete list is in the notes section of this presentation. Each number you see on this slide is the accepted amount of Level A injuries for the entire 5-year testing period. The letter of authorization has an extensive list of Level B harassment authorizations. The animals that I've listed in this chart are just a few. Level B harassment occurs whenever an animal changes its behavior, such as moving away from the sound, changes its diving or breathing patterns, or changes its vocalizations, or experiences temporary hearing loss. Before you're overwhelmed by the size of these numbers, take into consideration that impacts to animals by sonar and explosives are not always deadly and do not always cause any type of injury. However, if an animal is subjected to multiple Level B harassments, which is expected for some, permanent hearing loss or detrimental behavior changes may eventually occur. For the sake of length, I've focused on sonar and explosives as instruments of harm to marine mammals, but in its EIS report, the Navy discusses other ways in which marine life may be affected by its training activities. For instance, water quality could be compromised. Whales and other creatures may be hit by training ships. They may ingest munitions. And even human resources may be impacted. Despite the shocking numbers of potential animal injuries, the Navy does take precautionary measures during its training activities to mitigate harm to marine life. They don't just blow up bombs and emit sonar haphazardly. There's several rules in place. These are outlined in the LOA. There must be at least one lookout during training and testing activities. Mitigation zones of 500 yards are required for whales and 200 yards for all other marine mammals, except bow-riding dolphins, during vessel movement. Mitigation zones of 200 to 2100 yards are required for explosive and impulsive sound. Yardage depends on type of explosive or sound being used. A mitigation zone of 1.5 miles is needed for explosive bombing exercises. A stranding response plan is in place that requires a shutdown of training activities, immediate notification of NMFS, and incident reporting. A humpback whale cautionary area requiring high-level clearance is a requirement in training or testing use of mid-frequency active sonar between December 15th and April 15th. In addition to NEPA, objections to naval testing often also cite the Marine Mammal Protection Act. Enacted in 1972, this act prohibits the taking of marine mammals and prohibits the import, export, and sale of any marine mammal, along with any marine mammal part or product within the United States. Remember, the taking of a marine mammal refers to hunting and killing, as well as capturing and harassing. Harassment includes any act of pursuit, torment, or annoyance which has the potential to either injure a marine mammal in the wild or disturb it by causing disruption of behavioral patterns, which includes but is not limited to migration, breathing, nursing, breeding, feeding, or sheltering. However, exemptions to the Act are available to the Department of Defense when deemed necessary for national defense, and these exemptions have been used in the past. The National Resources Defense Council has a long history of bringing lawsuits against the Navy for their sonar and explosives use. The most recent lawsuit was filed on January 27, 2014. It challenges the NMFS's authorization of mammal deaths and injuries under the Marine Mammal Protection Act, as well as its finding under the Endangered Species Act that the Navy's activities will not jeopardize endangered blue whales. In a press release issued by the NRDC on the date of filing, they stated, "The federal government illegally granted the U.S. Navy permission to harm marine mammals nearly 10 million times in Southern California and Hawaii over the next 5 years. The permitting agency, the National Marine Fisheries Service, finalized rules last month that allowed the Navy to increase the projected marine mammal impact of its 2013 to 2018 sonar and explosives training activities by 1,100% as compared to the previous 5-year period. Of particular concern is the threat posed to beaked whales and endangered blue whales, which are suffer tens of thousands of impacts, according to NMFS. NRDC is not asking that the Navy stop its testing. The goal is better mitigation procedures, research, and further consideration of alternative methods of training. This quote from Michael Jasny, director of the NRDC's Marine Mammal Protection Project, sums up their stance fairly well. For whales and dolphins, the Navy's plan to ramp up training off our coast is simply not sustainable. The science proving the link between sonar exposure and population decline is mounting, and so are hundreds of solutions that could prevent thousands of needless injuries and hundreds of deaths. There are more than 35 species of whales and dolphins that make Southern California and the Hawaiian waters their home, including endangered blue whales, fin whales, and hearing-sensitive beaked whales. All are at risk from this preventable harm. The NRDC lawsuits are an attempt to find a better solution, one that does not involve death and harassment of thousands of animals, a figure that they find completely unreasonable. So what are these solutions that Jasny speaks of? This idea serves as an excellent example. The following quote is from the Acoustic Ecologies Institute's website, and they have drafted a 23-page report on the debate between the NRDC and the Navy, fact-checking the statements of each side. The statement below happens to be from neither side, however. It's from the AEI itself. Little investigation has taken place into the ways that different sound signals may be more or less disturbing to animals. Navy sonar signals come in many specific acoustic configurations, and so far, the choice about which to use is made based on operational factors, such as the best propagation through water, or creating the easiest to interpret echoes. It is possible that if biological sensitivity to the many signals were considered, there might be currently available sonar pings that would still be effective, while reducing their impacts on animals' auditory systems. It's solutions like these that environmentalists are asking the Navy to find. The evidence presented by both sides in this argument is at times conflicting. The opinions and interpretations on the evidence seems to always be conflicting. For example, the Navy believes that level B harassment causes negligible impacts and doesn't significantly impact the population as a whole, whereas the NRDC says that the huge numbers of level B harassments are unacceptable. The Navy takes blame for a total of 5 sonar-related strandings that occurred between 1996 and 2006. The NRDC says that sonar is correlated with 14 strandings between 1996 and 2006. That's nearly 3 times the number the Navy claims responsibility for. The Navy reminds us that there are thousands of sonar testing incidents in which whales do not beach. The NRDC comes back with not all fleeing or injured animals will beach. Many will simply just die and sink. Their numbers will be unaccounted for. The Navy also reminds us that far more marine mammals die from other human-induced causes, such as net entanglement and pollution, than from sonar testing. The NRDC stance is that this doesn't matter. And they ask the question, is cancer deaths in humans irrelevant because more people die of starvation? The Navy stance is that injury, disease, toxins, and navigation error are at fault for many of these stranding incidents. The NRDC argues that the Navy is too quick to rule out many strandings as sonar-related if the physical evidence is not found. But in many instances, physical trauma is not shown or the mammal is too decomposed for autopsy. As previously discussed, this is not the first showdown between the Navy and the NRDC over sonar and explosives training in our oceans. These are just 2 other lawsuits that have taken place with various results. I'll let you briefly read through these 2, and if you'd like to know more, the case links are at the bottom. So in conclusion, who is right? Does the NRDC have a case? Is the Navy violating NEPA or the Marine Mammal Protection Act? What about the Endangered Species Act? Or is the Navy legally and reasonably utilizing its right to train and protect national security? Perhaps the heart of the question is, what is the correct balance between environmental protection and effective training? The answers to these questions lie largely in one's view of the world, how much of an impact sonar is believed to actually have, what the evidence is of sonar-induced trauma, and where the line should be drawn in regards to animal impact. For example, are behavioral changes such as changes in migration routes unacceptable, or is physical harm or death the only unacceptable outcome? The current NRDC lawsuit is still underway. Only time will tell where the court's opinion lies.